Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. So many moons ago, when I started in financial services, I was meeting with this advisor, and he said, Matt, you know what? If you really want to know what an advisor's life is like, you need to read this blog by this guy named Michael Kitces. And this was in 2008. And I remember getting the first nerd's eye view. I remember just sitting there and reading it and thinking to myself, man, this guy really gets it. And then, of course, we know why he gets it because he's been such a successful advisor. But we're really going to lean into that today. We're going to lean into the historical research that Michael has been doing with his firm for a really, really long time. Now, I don't know if you all know this, but he's the head of planning strategy at Focus Wealth Partners, and he's also the co-founder of XY Planning Network. And one of these days, you should ask him to show you the old logos that he's still sporting for XY, because
Yes.
as a founder, as Mark will also tell you, they are short of swag. And then Mark, our fearless leader here at Zocks, he's the co-founder of Zocks,
Okay.
the number one AI assistant for financial advisors. He's held positions with enterprise leadership roles at Microsoft and Twilio, and he was the CTO at a fintech company, Hearsay Systems, which I'm sure all of you know what Hearsay is. Now, we all know that AI saves time, and that's super, super important. But we're here to talk about what's next. So not only can you have a better practice, but you can have a better life. You can be more efficient, and then you can take that efficiencies to the next level, because efficiency now is table stakes. All right, Michael, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
You've been tracking productivity. I mean, we quote these productivity
Yeah.
statistics all the time in our content. Why do you keep hammering that as just something
Ugh.
you've been studying for so long?
So like I guess part of this just I'm a nerd and a research nerd, so I like to measure and track things. But I so look, I'm 26 years in the business, which means I started of the era when most people still got recruited into insurance companies or wirehouses, big brokerage, where there was a weekly or monthly leaderboard of who the top producers were. And basically, those people were put up on the pedestal. Like, this is who you're supposed to aspire to. You want to do this, right? This person is $1 million producer because they literally did $1 million revenue in a year and they got to go to $1 million round table, right? And we sort of elevated this up, and what I found over the years was, on the one hand, there are kind of a subset of things that quote unquote top producers tend to do well, particularly around how they use their time, focus their time, and leverage their time, which I think we're going to talk about further. But there's also a remarkable range of what advisors actually do to be productive and successful. And as the business models have evolved, the drivers of what dictates those productivity outcomes have started to shift. And what I've observed at the same time is a subset of people that kind of get put up on the pedestal for being high revenue producers, but don't necessarily actually have healthy practices underneath. The roots of the industry, top producers were solely defined by revenue, not by like the bottom line take home income of their practice. And when most of us were salespeople at the end of the day, like, it was you, or it was like maybe you and an admin assistant who leveraged you. So your revenue was your income minus like a small grid payout. So they were kind of analogous. As we've started building and scaling practices and businesses, these numbers can disconnect. There are folks that do a lot of revenue but have terrible profitability. There are folks who have much more limited revenue and have astonishingly high profitability, all the way to the point that we still see like high income solos that take home more than partners at billion-dollar firms. That's a thing. And we see it every time we do our productivity studies. And so when you can build practices so many different ways, and some are healthy by revenue but not profitability, or profitability but not revenue, or being driven by other factors about how they use the time or leverage themselves, to me that becomes a fascinating puzzle to then start to analyze and try to solve for or tease apart, like, okay, what really are the things that are associated with better productivity for advisors?
Now let's talk about the puzzle, Mark, because I mean, you actually saw this as a puzzle that you and Akash wanted to go ahead and solve.
Yeah.
By the way, if anybody has any questions, let's put them in
Yeah.
the Q&A. Our team here at Zocks is monitoring the back, and I will also be monitoring too. But Mark, let's talk about the puzzle. Why did you want to build this?
Yeah, I think there are two real reasons, right? When we started, when we looked at AI and, there's a lot, I think anyone who's, dove in, there's just like, infinite ways to use it. The
Seriously.
big two things for us, it's almost like, it's hard to stay focused, frankly. The big two things for us, really, like as we started talking to advisors, it like I've worked on a lot of products. I've never seen it kind of like zoom in so quickly on like the pain they have of basically working with clients and writing like taking notes, writing information down like that.
Yeah.
Like you talk to 100 advisors and like 99 if not 100 like are just like yeah 100% that's the most painful thing. So
Uh-huh.
that was like frankly when you're working on products you're like that's an easy like I'm just gonna swing it. And then the second thing though, as we're looking at, building like, we are working to build a company that frankly transforms a lot of like how the industry works and everything else. I think we also became convinced very quickly that this information today, kind of to what Michael was saying, like it is actually not readily available for a lot of people, right? It's very hard to query, it's very hard to understand. And so although the start is kind of like, in Silicon Valley, you always talk about the painkillers, right? The start is the painkiller of like the notes and everything, but the real kind of like value is starting to understand like deeply about your clients and frankly for firms deeply about how their best people are operating, right? And if you go chat with people about it, and we've talked with a lot of them, you still, I would say the most common thing, if I was like, hey, what are your top producers doing? You realize that person has just went and grabbed coffee with the top producer and asked them, right? Like that's kind of
Yeah.
how it's working still. And, sometimes that top producer may tell you whatever they think or want you to think. And honestly, sometimes we've even seen their view of what makes them successful is actually not correct, right? Like it's a natural
Yes.
story, but like
It,
very often it's like this other thing you're doing
it's
that
one
is
of the
magic.
reasons why we like to do the research in that space as well,
100%.
Mark. We are not always the best self-diagnosers of our own
Yes.
success outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. So those are really the two. And, for us, although we, hopefully we've had a lot of impact for everyone that we've worked with, we think like this is super early still, right? Like I think as we look at 2 years out, 3 years out, 5 years out, kind of data driving how everyone is actually operating and helping them go deeper is just going to be awesome, right? Awesome for the industry, awesome for clients at the other side of it, the services are offering and everything else.
Well, let's talk about the awesomeness that this is going to be able to open up. So, when I first got introduced to Michael's blog, I was working in a place called Peak, which was Carson's consulting
Yeah,
program.
yeah.
And one of the things he used to say on stage all the time was the 100 touch points was such a huge difference in making him more referable. And Michael, you have data
Yes.
surrounding all of this, and we know that the more time you spend with clients, well, lots of good stuff happens. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this gets fascinating to me. I, we have like so many of us have researched. We do this, Cerulli, a bunch of the industry folks do as well. That I'll come back to, notwithstanding all the things that we fear about what's going to make clients retain and refer and be well engaged. And like, did we get good performance? And like, did we crush that Roth conversion and give them a big tax savings? When you go out and ask consumers, why did you fire your financial advisor in situations where they left? It,
Mhm.
it always, almost always comes down to a communication issue, not a performance issue. Did not get back to me timely, did not get back to me timely enough, was not very responsive. I haven't heard from him or her in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. It's almost always a timeliness of communication thing, not literally a even an investment performance outcome unto itself. Yes, there's always one or two squirrely clients that are just super judgy on performance and virus as soon as they don't get the number they like. But most client terminations are driven by communication challenges, and communication challenges ultimately come down to our time and capacity to be proactive and go out for communication. And then when we reach out for communication, actually having a good constructive conversation that wasn't just I mean, we can do a little bit of like, hey, I'm genuinely just reaching out to say hey and check in and how's everything going, but at some point a lot of clients at least want a little bit more. Like I appreciate that you keep reaching out, but like when you don't have anything useful to say or talk about, it kind of gets weird after a while. I like come to me with some ideas, come to me with some value, come to me with some usefulness, come to me with some something to substantiate why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
And when we look then and say, what are the blocking points that we don't have more conversations, it usually boils down to two elements. One essentially is time, just like capacity for time, right? Anything I can do to free up and leverage more of my time, the better my outcomes. And we see this pretty unequivocally in our data. The more time that advisors get to spend meeting and engaging with clients, the higher revenue productivity tends to be. Now, notably, we find that's not a world of like we're trying to figure out how to get to 80% of our time meeting with clients. There are some, I know, like big firm leadership folks that talk about this, but I don't know if this will resonate to other folks out there. But I just start thinking about like 80% of my time in client meetings. There's roughly 8 hours in a day. 80% of my client time would be 6+ hours of meetings per day, 5 days a week. I don't know anybody else, but like I am not excited to do 6 client meetings a day, 5 days a week. Like that does not sound like a technology-driven utopia. That sounds like a dystopia, like a very negative dystopian world. When we look at the data, what we really see is something more along the lines of reasonably successful advisors spend 20 to 25% of their time in client meetings, and really successful ones spend about a third of their time.
Okay.
It's about a 10% difference. Now, call it 40 something hours a week. A 10% difference is like 2 to 4 meetings a week, depending on how long your meetings are. 50-ish working weeks in a year. So yeah, you show me an advisor that does another 1 to 200 meetings with new clients or existing clients, and I will show you someone with higher touch points, deeper relationships, better retention, better referrals because of the sheer lift of engagement. So on the one hand, we don't actually have to move the needle far. This isn't a like, how do we get our time from 20% to 80%? I don't even want it to be 80%. Most of us don't, but just air quotes, just getting a 10 or 15% move, a couple hours a week that we can redirect to client meetings. When you add that in cumulative activity for the year, is that's 1 or 200 additional meetings, or if I'm doing check-in calls or other things, that could be 2, 3, 400 additional touch points with my clients. And that is a really dramatic, meaningful shift in how engaged clients feel. And we can see it very directly in lifts in revenue productivity.
Well, I love, and one of the things that I've always loved about your research is you're not asking people to go to Tony Robbins over the weekend and make huge sweeping differences. You're talking about gradual changes, like those
Game of
little things.
inches.
Yeah,
This is still, there's a lot to be accomplished in just playing the game of inches.
yeah. Well, okay, but let's dive a little bit more deeply into the capacity restraints, right? And so and I'm sure. I know you do a lot of conferences, but I know you're in and out, and doofuses like me are listening to all of you guys. And so many people make reference to this fact about that the 80-20 rule, the fact of where the advisors are spending their time. What is stopping them from being able to hold those extra meetings, do those extra touch points? What is that capacity constraint?
So I think it's sort of twofold related, but it essentially comes down to some version of you load me up with too many intense client meetings and I burn out.
Oh.
I burn out. It's like I mean, ask any great manager, like, do you love meeting with your people? Yeah. Do you love engaging with them? Yeah. Is it great to lift them up? Yeah. Do you want to spend 6 hours a day in meetings with them? Oh, Lord, no. Like, I'm going to burn out as a manager if I do that with my direct reports. And so, right, the industry's version is like, well, but if you had like a great tool to capture all the notes when you were doing your management meetings and to expedite the takeaways after your management meetings, then you could manage 30 direct reports instead of 8, right? It's like, no, I'm still going to burn out as a manager. And as we see this routinely in our data, there are a subset of you out there who are listening who love client meeting. Like, you are actually the ones that really do the like 6, 7, 8 client meetings a day. I know a few of you out there, like in the old days, you'd get like a stack of files. You put them on the passenger seat of the truck. You drive around to all your clients. You come back to the office at the end of the day. You drop a stack off to your staff. You pick up tomorrow's stack and you go do the next thing. And you freaking loved it. And you were doing like 30 meetings a week, 40 meetings a week. That is not normal, though. What we see for most advisors with astonishing consistency is that we come in somewhere between about 8 and 15 client meetings a week, depending on whether you're a little earlier stage, we do a little more. Some of us just like higher meeting volume, or we have clients with shorter meetings where they're not as complex. You work with higher dollar, more complex clients, it tends to be longer meetings. You have a little bit fewer of them, right? 8 or 9 meetings is basically, I have 2 or 3 deep meetings with my high value clients on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I prep on Monday, I wrap up on Friday, and I repeat my weekly cycle. So where does the capacity constraint come in, Matthew? I think it's twofold. Part of it is because we tend to be relationship creatures. I'm not just showing up at a meeting to disseminate a little bit of information and move on. We try to actually build meaningful relationships with clients. Relationships take time. Emotionally laden conversations that often crop up with clients takes time. And if you stack too many emotionally intense meetings on someone, they just burn out, right? And this isn't even unique in our space, right? There's now this phenomenon being documented of like intensiveness burnout from a lot of AI functions. Where like the good news is the AI is simplifying the simple stuff so you can do the complex intense stuff, but the bad news is like but the human being can't actually do like super intense heavy load brain work for 8 hours a day. Some of the fact that we took breaks at the water cooler was not because we're being wasteful. It's because my brain needs a break after all these intense meetings before I can go on to the next. The secondary constraint that potentially crops up with this is there is some fascinating research out there known as Dunbar's number that finds like as a species, there's a certain part of our brain that manages our social relationships with others, with other human beings. And this part of the brain exists across many species. And Robin Dunbar, the researcher who found this, has studied this across species and found this astonishing consistency that the particular size of that part of the brain is directly correlated to how large the species organizes into herds or social units. So if your brain has that part of your brain is small in your species, you might have like a herd of 5 people. If it's very large, you might have a flock of 500. The human being version shows up at about 150 people. That's just like that's where our kind of brain correlates on this size. Now, each brain varies. We're wonderfully varied as human beings, so someone will be above the average and below the average. But this number is held fascinatingly throughout history. The common size of a military unit going back 3,000 years has been about 150 to 160 people. They found like tribes in untouched tribes in the wilderness that figured out all by themselves when the village gets larger than about 150 people, social cohesion breaks down and they break into separate units. And when they even studied this when Facebook first came out in the early years of Facebook, when everybody digitally collected to all their friends, the average person had 152 friends on Facebook. Now the number's messed up because I have all the friends I've ever met in the past 15 years of Facebook, so my numbers are all wonky. But when they did it at the time with real-time connections, like point being, it even translated to the digital world because there's just a like literal brain limitation before you're sitting down across from a client. You're going like, I know we talked about some stuff before, but were you the one that was going to do the vacation to Australia or the other play? Like, yeah. Wait, were you the dog lover or the cat lover? Like, you just start losing some of the details in trying to maintain these social units. The tech can bolster us a little there, actually, in really cool ways with what tools like Zocks have built. But our brains just start to struggle past a certain number of relationships that we're trying to nurture, which is why when we look broadly in the industry research that we do and have done for years and years, the average number of clients per advisor sits for most firms at like 60 to 80 clients per advisor. And a bunch of us are like, oh, that's dumb. I got 150 plus clients. I'm like, yeah, tell me about your team. Like, it's me, an associate advisor, and admin. It's like, oh, so it's you and a second advisor. So if I take 150 clients, I divide it by 2 of you, you're right back in the 60 to 80 range. And if you get up to 80 to 100, and very rarely does anyone get above that. And if they do, they're usually exhibiting a lot of signs of burnout. Because not only does my brain cap out at 150, but like I can't use all those for clients as my deep friends. Because I also have like my friends and my family and like the people I value my relationships with outside of work. So my clients can't have all the spots. And so what we see is that there's some level of lift in meeting time, meeting activity, and in touch points that we can get with various combinations of tech and team giving us leverage. But then there's a point of diminishing returns or threshold where even if you give me enough tech that I could meet with 6 client meetings a day, 5 days a week, I don't want to. I'll actively resist. And in essence, I will find other non-client things to do in my day
Yep.
because I am trying to be like a productive worker, but you're going to burn me out if you make me do six client meetings every day all week long. So there's a partial lift that we get from tech and team, but then we still hit kind of a just emotional burnout relationship capacity threshold. And beyond that, the way team and tech shows up starts to shift, and it becomes less of a pure efficiency thing, like expand my capacity, and it becomes more of an effectiveness thing, which is, hey, I can only do so many client meetings a week, but if you can give me a better dossier going into the client meeting, so I'm even more on target and sharp about what we were talking about last meeting and what's going on in their life, and that like brief mention they made about the trip that's coming up that now I'm going to lead off the conversation with because I know that was a thing. I forgot about it, but my tool surfaced it up to me. Now suddenly my productivity lifts are less about efficiency and more about effectiveness, how well I'm showing up in the meetings, how meaningful the touch points are, how well engaged clients feel, which then drives my retention, drives my referrals, drives my ability to command pricing power, and all the things that ultimately pick up real business metrics.
Well, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. We all know that the team and tech are humongous. There is a big difference in how many people we need coming in this industry. And I was just meeting with the CEO of the Finser Foundation at a conference
Yeah.
recently, and she's like, "We've just got kids lining up left and right, students in college who really want to get into this. They just really need mentors." And I'm hoping that through efficiencies and things like that, we can get more advisors like those of you who are on this webinar right now who will volunteer their time to really nurture that next generation. But the next phase of all of this, and Michael, thank you for teeing this up so
Yeah.
beautifully, which is being able to actually have repeatable systems that will allow you to have better
Yes.
conversations and better follow-up, better products and services, better offerings. Um, Ryan Townsley was just on your podcast, which happens to be a client of ours, and I
Yeah.
actually know the guy. I love that guy.
Yeah,
I'm
Ryan's
so
awesome.
glad he was on your show because he's such a great example of a wonderful advising firm. And
Yep.
he did talk about, how AI has really helped with some of the heavy liftings with the repeatable systems. You've done all sorts of research on systems. Would you mind talking about the repeatable process component of what your research has shown?
Yeah, so this is a domain where like I AI is showing up in interesting ways, and in the spirit of what we said earlier, we sometimes what we attribute the success to isn't quite actually the success. Um Shows up here. So there is a clear lift we see in our data when firms get more consistent in their systems and process, right? We have some kind of ongoing, repeatable way that we do the set of things that we do for clients in order to support and fulfill them on an ongoing basis. Like we have a clear onboarding process. Step one occurs, then step two occurs, then step
Mhm.
three occurs. Ideally, it's programmed into our CRM system or some kind of task management system. So everybody knows what they're doing in the process. When you check off your task, it automatically goes to the next person's task to do the thing. And then everything just kind of flows through consistently. That has a huge lift in productivity of the firm overall, not just of the advisor, but staff in the aggregate. What we actually see most commonly with firms that build good process is they don't need as many support staff members per lead advisor because the systems run more consistently. Uh, the caveat for a lot of advisory firms is, but we don't have good systems and process, right? Yeah, I mean, for some of us, it's sort of a badge of pride. Every client receives personalized service to their individual needs and circumstances. Like you can't standardize it, then you take away all the personalization that I pride myself on as a financial advisor. And you can do that to a certain point, but at the least, if you're doing that, you're not charging a premium price, and most of us do not. We like to charge the same average fee as everybody else. If we're charging average fees for now what is desystematized, hyper-personalized service, we start getting scalability and profitability problems. So what I've watched happen in the industry over the past year or two is a lot of firms are saying, well, we really want to leverage AI. And the
Mhm.
first question that crops with AI, like I can teach AI to do my process with various agentic tools that do some of the steps of the process, but I can't teach AI to do my process if I don't have a process. It still doesn't work. Right? It's like I remember years ago, an advisor friend was like, we spend so much time rebalancing all of our client portfolios, and we got rebalancing software because that was supposed to help. And we bought the rebalancing software, we did all the implementation, we did all the stuff, and like it still takes forever. I was like, well, tell me a little bit more about your, how you build your portfolios, how you build your models. Like, oh, we don't do models. Like every client has a different portfolio. It's always specific to their circumstances. I'm like, well, you can't have technology scale your trading process if your trading process is still 172 individual processes for 172 individual clients. Like that, you didn't have a technology problem, you had a process problem. So then they said, well, we want to get more efficient with the tech. We're going to put people into standardized models. And then their productivity went through the roof. And they were like, the technology is amazing. Like, look, the tech was really cool to run your systematized process, but the breakthrough wasn't actually the tech. The breakthrough was systematizing. And then once you did that, the tech scaled it up. And I'm seeing some similar things happen with AI, where I've seen some firms have some pretty big breakthroughs in getting more productivity by trying to use AI to start automate pieces of the process. But when we get in, what we find out is they didn't just go from manual processes to tech-driven processes. They went from no process to tech-driven processes. And when we decompartmentalize that, what we find out is it was like 80% of the value was creating a process and 20% of the value was using tech to leverage the process. And like, I love me some tech. I'm not saying that to like belittle the tech, but the tech often isn't actually the blocking point. The blocking point becomes us and our willingness to try to create some kind of more consistent process, steps of the process, what we do in a consistent manner that's more repeatable, because that lets us train staff, that lets us run more efficiently, that lets us start now leveraging technology to do it in cool, repeatable ways, whether that's CRM or AI or business process automation or all the different ways that we can go about it. It starts with, are we willing to try to commit to some more consistent process? And that becomes really hard because at best, what that means is we have a long list of exceptions that we need to stop treating as exceptions. And at worst, we have to actually rethink our value proposition away from, well, my value is I literally do different things for every client. Like, that's cool if you want to run a bespoke individual practice around yourself. You can totally do that as a solo if you want to. But if your vision is to scale beyond yourself, that becomes very problematic very quickly.
Yeah. I remember one of the first things that we had at Carson was a systems manual, and it was 2 4-inch 3-ring binders, man, that people would buy it because they just needed those systems. And Mark, one of the things that you and I have talked about, and I love this, is we started as a note taker, and our note takers awesome, right? But we're really now an AI assistant. I mean, the roadmap that you guys have been focusing on is really starting to solve a lot more problems than just something listening, and transcribing during client meetings. And one of the big things that Michael hinted at this earlier was being able to be more prepared for meeting prep. Would you mind just talking a little bit about the vision and some of the other features? Because we've actually gotten some questions, by the way, in the chat. Some of the features of what our roadmap looks like and what people have now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say this goes back, Michael, to your point around like, how many people can you work with, comfortably, I'll say. We see a lot of people, I'm sure everyone's, has this a little bit, like they're nervous, especially as they get up to a certain number of clients, because they're like, crap, is Michael the cat person or the dog person? Like, did he go skiing or does he hate skiing? Like all of these types of things. And so one of the biggest things that we've done, and it goes exactly back to like, we want to let everyone run the process they want to run and they need to run. Where they may not have one, we have practice management to kind of help with that and get through it. But like, so we have some people as an example before meetings, so we'll use our meeting prep. And I've told the story a few times, but it sits with me where, they want to know the holdings. They want to know what's happened since they last spoke. They want to know what items, the client was supposed to do, what they were supposed to do. So they're all prepped. But at the top of the meeting, because they're very personal, and they do pretty much everything in person, they literally have the client's coffee order. And because like what happens is the admin essentially comes in, the meeting before, and they're like, hey, can I take your coffee order? They go do it. And so this advisor, and it was a fairly large RA that was recruiting them, they said, what can we do to help you? And he was like, if I know my clients' coffee orders so that the coffee is sitting, with their name on it in the meeting room before they hop in, I'm good, right? And that, like, so that's a huge unlock, right? We have other people, obviously, who flip it completely around, right? They really want to know what are the finances and everything else. But the nice thing with AI, as Michael was saying, is because you can actually like, we think of it as almost mesh across and connect with all these systems. You can literally have like the children and the pet's name right next to their top holdings, right next to tax information from like Plan, right? Like we can just connect in with all of these systems and pull in what they want. And if it's different types of client or different types of meetings, especially like it's, let's say, more of a prospecting or an earlier meeting or a suitability meeting versus an annual review of somebody you know well, that'll change completely, right? So like, it'll essentially adapt. And this is, I think, one of the greatest things of AI is it's very good at pulling data together that wasn't necessarily meant to get pulled together, frankly. And it's very impactful there. So I would say like that is a huge piece. The other thing that we've seen just to help people with their practice a lot is often, Michael's obviously right in the sense of like a lot of people have very, I'll say bespoke, solutions for all their clients, and they love that. When you go down a layer, there's often like a lot of building blocks, right, that they're trying to use, and they just maybe haven't figured those out yet. So because we have access to this information, you can now ask the system and query it, like, who has student loans over a certain amount and hasn't done whatever, right? And it turns out if like if as an example, let's say that you primarily serve doctors and dentists, like student loans and how much they put into their practice is a huge aspect for their, and although
Yeah.
everyone has their unique things, and some people may have big families and that's a priority, and some people may just want to make a lot of money and that's a priority, like whatever they do is fine. But those underlying things and being able to know, like, okay, what situation is this person in? And even more importantly, like, because people like when you reach out at timely, like let's say an event's going on in the world or something, and you're like, hey, I want to know everyone in my book who has a student loan over a certain amount because I know they're collecting. Again, we heard this news, right? I want to reach out to them. I want to reach out to them in a personal way. Like those things are so much more valuable than like every 6 months being like, how's it going, Matt? Like everything good? Let's get together to talk, right? Like it's tricky. And so those are the big things, that we really see. I think the other thing, just for people who have a lot of clients, there's obviously saving the time and doing more client meetings, and I 100% agree with Michael of like, you can get 10% out of that. 10% is a huge deal, but like you can't, it's like the person who drove around in the truck. Like part of that driving is so they can get their brain to relax between meetings. Like if you're just
Uh-huh.
zooming, like bang, 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 you're just like, but one of the things that we see that's just super interesting is like, very often the client has limited time to talk, right? And so what they want to do is they're like, I only have half an hour with this person every 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, and they want to get as much done as they can get. And so if they can go in warm, like ask the personal questions, make sure the family's doing okay, make sure nothing's changed there, and then, like get through that and kind of survey things. That's hugely valuable to them because then they're able to get a lot more done for that client every year, even though they may have the same like half hour or hour and a half or something with the client in that time. So I would say those are the big things, but like 100% agree with Michael of, the people who have processes, we saw this right from the start, right? And like you can take those and AIify them and we can just like they measure
Yep.
everything right away and can go. I think the bigger challenge, which we're getting a lot more into, is like how do we help the people who may not have as much of a process
Hmm?
really discover what they're doing,
Yeah.
right? And kind of get the
Well,
patterns in place so they can relax a bit.
and can we go there for a moment, Mark? Because I'm seeing like questions cropping up in chat and Q&A around this, right? For those who are like, I'm sold on building processes, but like, really, how do I actually
Hmm.
start doing that and documenting them and going about it? So look, so very practically, like, here's how I've done it across number of different businesses that I've built and created over the years, where it almost always starts with like us as the chief cook and bottle washer and like doer of everything. You just next time you do it with screen sharing software on and talk while you're doing it to explain what you're doing as though someone was looking over your shoulder and like watching you type and watching your screen as you do it. In the old days, God bless, I used to use a tool called Screencast-O-Matic.
Yeah.
That was the like
Yeah.
screen sharing software now. Now more practically, you're probably using a tool like Loom. That's very much built for this. So every time I did a thing, I turned on the screen sharing recording software. I narrated and explained what I was doing as I did it. I saved the file in a file folder as an output. And after a month or two of doing what I do in my work, there's 10, 20, 30 documented processes there. Uh, then when I got to hiring my first admin, it's like, here's our processes. Take them for a spin. Probably not going to work perfectly because, there's just things I know how to do because I've done it forever that I didn't necessarily explain well in the video. Who knew? It made sense to me. So I'll give it to the person, say, like, so try doing the processes. And we're gonna have a check-in for 30 minutes every week where I want you to bring all the stuff you're stuck on. I tried to do the process and it didn't work. And you're gonna bring all those questions. We're gonna go through them and figure out. You're gonna document an updated version, then you're gonna re-record a better one because this is not my natural gift. I know what I do enough that my business has survived to the point that it is now where it's financially viable enough that I can hire you, but this is not my gift. This is why I hired you. This is not my gift. So I've taken at least version 1.0 of I'm just literally capturing what I'm doing and explaining it. And your job then is to come back to me with questions as you try to implement it. And then you're going to record version 2.0 that's going to look a little cleaner and more solid. The next step of this is, so there's going to be two problems that occur when your person tries to do the first list of processes that you've given them. Part of the problem is that it won't be as clear as you thought it was. No disrespect to you or me or any of us, just you. When you explain a thing you do naturally, there's just a lot of kind of sub-steps that you skip because you don't even think about it or why it's there until someone's coming in cold and they're like, I don't understand. So they'll come with questions and gaps where they just weren't sure how to do the process. And then they'll come with questions because I know that we have the process, but we're onboarding Mr. or Mrs. Smith and they have this other circumstance that doesn't fit the process because you said you wanted to do this special thing for them. And now we're creating our exceptions list. So my person's going to come with two problems when they're trying to run their processes. Things where the process isn't clear, I can explain it better. And things where there are exceptions that don't fit the process. And now we have to start making an exceptions list and doing the super hard thing for us as advisors, which is deciding which exceptions am I no longer going to tolerate because it's preventing my ability to scale the business. And it's hard because those are the ones where I actually have to go back to a client and say, I know we used to do this, but we can't do this for you anymore. And we can't work with you anymore, or we can do it this way, but not that way. How you accommodate it depends on the client and the circumstance and what the thing was. But part of this is just figuring out how to document system and process. And the other part is owning the fact that you are probably going to have to start winding down some exceptions that you had. And like, you can have a few, as Steph Bogan, who also does a lot of practice manager coaching, likes to say, like, you can have half a dozen exceptions for anything. If it's more than half a dozen, it's not an exception anymore. It's just a new segment.
The norm. Yeah.
And the new segment is more problematic to manage than an exception. So you can always have a few. You just can't have all of them because all of them is a problematic thing that doesn't scale. So start with just like record it yourself, give it to someone else to try it out, have them come back to you to make it better because there'll be gaps, have them record version 2, and then start documenting your exception list and figure out which ones you're going to blow up. And as you get there, you can get to, okay, now how do we actually build this as workflows in our CRM or other systems that we use? If you've got a team member that can drive that, great. If not, you can go hire a consultant that helps with that. There are folks out there that do it. I'll post like in the chat, like we have a whole services map with a whole bunch of operations consulting folks that help do that. But the first thing anyone is going to do if you want them to make your firm more systematized is they're going to say, tell me about your systems and processes. And so you can pay them to take you through the process as well, but you can often start that yourself and then go to them when you actually say like, okay, we've got a library of 10, 20, 30, 40 of these little video snippets of all the things, but now we really need you to help us build it into our software and like what happens in Zocks and what happens in my CRM and what happens in other tools. And the operations consulting folks are very good at linking all that stuff together.
Sorry, Screencast-o-matic, my friend.
Screencast-o-matic.
Flooded back.
I don't even know if it's still out there.
Unbelievable memories. That was funny. Okay, so the title of this webinar is You've Got Over 100 Clients. How well do you really know them? Let's break down
Yeah.
efficiency versus effectiveness. Michael, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. So again, when I look at our data and where tech shows up in firms, it kind of goes through these waves and cycles. As we're getting going, and it's just us, there's things we do, that are less efficient use of our time than doing client things, and we start trying to find tech to make us more efficient. All right, save me 5 minutes here and an hour there, and like that stuff really adds up. Then eventually we get large enough where we can afford to hire staff. And what we find quite strikingly in our data is that hiring team to leverage us is actually drastically more impactful even than the tech. Love me some good tech. We put out our tech map and do all the things, but team beats tech quite resoundingly in productivity, because the tech still requires me to do a thing. I might do it faster and more expediently, right? You know, it cuts down the time I need to do the thing, but I still have to do it. I still have to own it. I still have to spend mental brain share making sure it got done and thinking in my head, did that box get checked for that client to do that thing? And when you actually get staff and you get to delegate, you get to fully let go of it.
Mhm.
And so there's a phase where team becomes a much bigger lift than technology. Then eventually it comes full circle. Now I've got a team that's fully built around me of 2 or 3 people that support me to get me to maximal productivity. And now the question is, how effective is our team? And the answer is, well, if your team members are doing a bunch of things that could be automated by technology, they're not spending as much time helping you serve your clients well. And so then the tech reappears on the other end, but it's actually much less about making the advisor more efficient, and it's much more about making all the team members that serve the advisor more efficient. So there's kind of a waves effect to this. But the key takeaway that I would give is a lot of tech that we try to use as advisors to make ourselves more efficient is tech that if you had the right team in place, you wouldn't even need to log into in the first place. And a
Yeah.
lot of the
All right.
conversations that I see in our advisor landscape, like, you know, all this tech is driving me nuts. Like, I get tech to do this and tech to do that. Now I have to log into 15 pieces of tech. When I hear that, I'm like, that's usually actually a team problem. That means you might be taking the tech a little bit too far as a personal productivity tool. I mean, the tech has to be what it is to run the things that it runs, but how much of that tech would you not need to log into if you delegated that thing to your team member and let them be the one that logs in and does that task? Like, what if you never had to log in your custodian anymore because your team member logs into the custodian to do that, and you don't need to log into the financial planning software anymore because they bring you drafts of the plan that you review together, and you don't have to log in a holistic plan anymore because they just bring you the output and you double check and make sure it looks right for the clients. And suddenly you're not logging into the tech as much and you're not using as much, but it's still awesome tech to make the experience better for the client. So I still need the tech. It just becomes a little bit of a shift of who uses it. And when we go down that road and then we say, well, what tech still shows up for the advisor? It starts to look like a very different constellation of tech. I'm not logging into a bunch of things to do steps and processes in a workflow. I need to do the trade. I need to move cash. I need to pull up the record to find when we sent that form to the client. My team starts doing that now. What do I care about when I'm using software? It basically comes down to 2 things. I need the software that lets me do deeper, more engaging advice. So think I log into my CRM less, but I log in a Holistiplan a lot more. Or I use the advanced modules of my financial planning software, or at least our team does and serves them up to me. And we're putting a lot of time and energy there because I'm trying to go deeper with advice. The second part that crops up, getting very much to our theme for the day here, is I need to be up to speed on the client relationship and what's actually going on in the client's life. And, you know, for any of us that have been around for a while, historically, that was some version of you open the CRM and you go through the past 5 to 30 lines of notes in the CRM, depending on how active your firm is in taking notes of every single thing that's happening. And you read through 1 or 2 dozen random entries, most of which is not really germane to the client meeting, but every now and then there's something buried in the third paragraph of the note that someone left about the client that mentioned a thing on the phone call while we were doing the transfer. And I try to gather all that stuff up to figure out what the heck I'm supposed to be talking about when I go into a client meeting. And now AI just says, yeah, I chunked through all the notes and everything you talked about in the last meeting. Like, here's the stuff to talk about. Boom, I'm off. So I instantly get a deeper, more meaningful conversation with the client, and I save a ton of time going through prep notes and reading historical CRM information. And so when I look at these domains, like it's sort of the relationship intelligence to prep for the meeting, and it's the tools that take me deeper in the advice process. And so I collectively call these effectiveness tools, not efficiency tools, because the irony is sometimes they actually create more work. Like I'm doing deeper planning for my clients, and now we're doing all these Roth conversions. And the good news is I spend 15 minutes less on prep for the meeting. The bad news is the meeting takes 30 minutes longer to explain the Roth strategy, and then they want to do it, and then we have to do like 3 follow-up things to actually do the Roth conversion. I literally made more work for myself on the whole, but I'm giving better, more meaningful advice. I'm creating better outcomes for clients. I'm having deeper conversations, which means I would expect to see retention goes up and referrals goes up and like wallet share or fees goes up depending on what your business model is. So a whole bunch of things that get improvements, but the lift doesn't come because I'm like, I got this great tech. Now I can do 170 clients. The lift often comes because now I can go super deep with my best clients and have better conversations and deeper advice relationships.
Yeah. And that's the key that your research has been really pointing to for so long, is what can we do in any step of the way to make it so that you're having more meaningful conversations. And Mark, I go to a lot of conferences, and a lot of people say, okay, well, hey, I'm using this part of the tool. What is the next big tool step that I should make within the Zocks system? And I always talk about meeting prep. And I don't want you to talk about meeting prep though, but I really want you to talk about being able to ask some of those questions like Michael was just talking about, be able to ask your book of business some questions. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think what Michael was saying is just very important in the sense of, um, very often I think in this industry you need to go deep with clients at certain times, right? Like frankly around life events, right? Or it could be financial, it could be personal, whatever else. And so being able to dive in quickly and deeply just makes people a lot more effective. Like you're not going through, like frankly, if you look at a firm that has more than one advisor, right? You can almost open up the CRM, look at the note, and figure out which advisor wrote it because some of them are great, some of them are chicken scratch, all of
Yes.
these different things. Like it's kind of, and so having consistent data is huge. One of the biggest things that we've seen as a great, like I'll say initially side effect, frankly, but now people use it regularly, is they can go in and ask a question. And that question goes across, email, goes across previous meetings, it goes across, again, tax planning, planning systems, portfolio management, whatever they have connected. And most people like will connect most of those. And so, because sometimes, like as an example, Matt, let's say you're one of my clients. Sometimes my clients are going to be heavily conversational, right? Like there's not a lot of dialogue between our meetings, and that's fine. Other people are really heavy on email. That's fine. Right. And so when you look at each of these individual systems, this is going to sound a little nerdy, but they're kind of like sparse matrices, right? Like sometimes there's good data in the CRM system. Sometimes there's not, right? Sometimes the planning system is super up to date because you just did a plan. Sometimes it's not. And that's not even advisor by advisor or firm by firm. Sometimes that's client by client. And so being able to go in and just ask, like, again, like the personal data, like what's their dog's name? Like, what are they holding? Do they have this? Do they not? Is huge. And again, it allows you to go deeper. And I think the other like psychological effect is it just gives people a lot of confidence going in because they're a lot less worried that they're going to miss something, which like as we've talked with advisors is a regular concern of theirs, right? Like they just don't want to be like, hey, you told me this really important thing 9 months ago, whatever, right? That your daughter's doing something that's really important to you. And I totally blanked on it and forgot. Now I'm, whatever, recommending something or bringing up something that's totally inappropriate.
Yeah.
So that's where like the ask anything is great. And we see it, like we started it, just as you said, around meeting prep. One of the most common cases, honestly, which is funny but great, is someone will call the office and the assistant will pick up the phone and let's say they're like, hey, this is Michael Kitces. And they're like, what do I ask Michael Kitces about? And it's just like, you met with Michael Kitces 2 weeks ago. You're waiting for this. And so all of a sudden
Yes.
they're like, hi, Michael, it's great to talk with you. I know we're waiting on your blah, 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 and we owe you blah, blah, blah. And it's just like the whole,
Yeah.
especially with a team, that it just becomes a machine because the data, is where it needs to be.
Yeah, Mark, it resonates with me because I still remember the training I got early in my career from one of the advisors I worked deeply with, who said, like, look, here's the deal. Anytime a client calls for me, I never give my clients my number directly. It always goes to, at the time it was like an admin assistant secretary first. I was like, well, like, why? It seems like your clients know it's you. Like, that's an extra step. He said, look, here's the reality. If it goes to my admin assistant, she usually she can take the call. She can tell the client that she's tracking me down and it'll be a few minutes.
Yeah.
And that gives me a few minutes to pull up the CRM, read through the last 5 to 10 notes, figure out what the heck is going on with this client so that then I can answer the call. And he's like, if I ever get it directly, I will just say to someone if they manage to catch me off guard, hey, give me a moment. Let me put you on hold for a moment while I pull up your information. And it's not actually because he needed the time to pull up the information. It's because he needed the time to read the last 5 to 10 entries in the CRM to know what was going on before he could have the conversation. So basically, and I did this for years and years on his training. It was like I had to build a barrier between me and access to the clients because I don't want to embarrass myself on the phone by showing I don't actually recall what's going on in their life and why they're calling me. And it otherwise took time because I'm hunting through multiple line items of a CRM system trying to find it until tools come forward. They're just like, here's what's going on in the client's life. Here you go. And like now I can be much more rapidly responsive to clients.
100%.
Well, all right, Michael, I'm going to pitch this back to you here.
Yeah.
What should we have asked you about this stuff that we didn't?
Ooh. Gosh, I mean, my starting point always is just like, just start using it for the full meeting cycle. Because I find the benefits show up in different places for different advisors. The version 1.0 of AIs as note takers, sort of like narrowly defined where they started, was you spend all this time taking notes and the AI can take the notes faster, and it takes way less time to review it than it does to do it yourself. It's like, yes, that's true. But the awkward, dirty secret in the industry is a big chunk of us don't actually spend a lot of time taking notes because we maybe weren't the best note takers in the first place. And so if you actually give me a new piece of tech that does the notes automatically and then I review them, that actually takes me more time because I used to not really spend that much time on notes. I probably should have, but I didn't. But now you're like creating work for me. And if I'm not already the voluminous note taker, that was kind of a negative for the other segment of advisors. But I think more of us actually gain from what happens when you go through full meeting cycle, which is the reality that last meeting's documentation notes are next meeting's more efficient prep going in. And for a lot of advisors, I see the lift is not coming on the time savings from the notes, if they weren't already high volume note takers in the first place. It's coming in, I'm realizing now that I'm like 6 to 12 months in the software and I'm going into future meetings with notes that came out of prior meetings that are much better. Like, I'm having better client meetings now, like, because I'm having better conversations. I surface the discussions better. I get to the heart of the matter faster. We're having deeper, more meaningful client conversations because I'm not doing the chit-chatty thing while I'm feeling things out because I didn't have time to read 70 lines of the CRM and I'm trying not to step on a landmine while I'm getting the conversation going. And now I can go in the meeting better prepared, higher confidence. It doesn't take me a lot of time to get up to speed. And so they don't find the benefit on the time savings up front. They find it on the meeting prep on the future meetings as they go. But you kind of have to go through a full meeting cycle. A lot of us are 2 to 3 meetings a year. It's like you got to get 3, 6, 9 months in before you get the meeting prep on the new one from the notes on the old one to get one of those lifts in the cycle. And again, this is why I talk about it a lot, is it's not just efficiency tech, it's effectiveness tech. You really might not save much of any time on that. You will if you were a heavy prep person or a heavy note taker person, but not all of us are. But almost all of us can get a lift on, I'm just entering client meetings better prepared with more information at my fingertips to have a just genuinely better, more meaningful, engaging meeting with the client.
Yeah. All right, Mark, what do you think?
All right, so 1,000% agree with everything. I think the other thing that we see just to add to that is like once you're using it, again, this is nerdy, so I apologize, but the data you have gets more dense and you can just do things with that, right? So like just to land this for people that, are obviously understandably, trying to grow their business and retain clients better and everything else, right? This is how like, we have stories now of like someone who brought 6 million, worth of assets under management in 2 meetings. In the second meeting, it came over and he was like, there's no way we would have had a plan for that person. But because we can fill out e-money fully, because this person's been using us for a while, he had one intro meeting, filled out e-money, and he was like, I was ready with the plan. And that person had frankly, a problem situation they wanted dealt with. Another totally different scenario, but good example is like someone bought a book of business, right? They're calling all their people and kind of checking in and, doing all of this. And one guy he gets on the phone with, and it was a farmer who was quite well off. And, he's like, I'm dealing with a sick chicken, I think. And the guy's like, what? And he's like, oh, my daughter has a chicken or pet chicken, or, and he goes into it. And so anyways, at the end of it, he looks at these notes, right? Things that you would never write down. And it had like, handling, sickness of pet chicken and the chicken's name. I don't remember what it was.
No.
And so he sent him a gift basket and he's like, hey, I hope, chicken's name is doing well and you and your daughter are doing well. And he's like, that client I have for life now, right? That guy was like, I love this. Thank you, Mike. And so like, those are just two totally different examples, right? Like one very financially system oriented, but the thing is when you have this data and, like it's not only like getting notes into CRM and stuff, which is super helpful and does save time, but underneath this, we have all of this information now that you can start to just offer like super personalized service with that, like I'm sure we've all met these people who are like master networkers, right? Where I'm just like, they can see someone, they haven't seen them in a year and they go right into all the details and you're like, ah. And this is kind of what's getting enabled now, which is really like, it really changes the game.
Mark, you had an important point there I would highlight as well. It's in the context of notes. Just to me, there's two different kinds of notes that come out of a client meeting. I guess there are really three. There's compliance notes, like things I just literally need to document in paper for the file. There's some kind of action related notes, like let's just make sure we do the things. That's basically like things I or our team need to make sure we do as commitments coming out of this meeting. And then there's what I would characterize just relationship notes about the client and who they are and what they do and the pet chicken and all the things.
Yeah.
And I find that's the part that we tend to leave behind unless we are really voluminous note takers.
Yeah.
We'll do the compliance stuff to the extent we have to, but we tend to minimize that. We'll do the action item stuff because it's got to hand off to someone. But you have to really be a proactive note recorder to get all the relationshipy stuff in there. And a lot of us don't. So it just sits in our head. And that works when we're smaller and there's only so many clients. And I really can remember all my clients in my head. But that also becomes something that's super problematic as the business starts to grow and scale. Like details in my head about the client, my team doesn't know. Then I bring on an associate and the associate doesn't know. Then I try to hand off clients to someone else. And if it's all in a relationship intelligence system, they're just like, give me a dossier on this client. And otherwise I have to like spend an hour talking about every single client and trying to dredge up all the things that I know about them from the past 5, 10, 15 years that I've been working with them. And it's just a mess. And so like notes is not a monolith thing. There's actually several layers of it. And to me, the biggest lift that tends to come from the AI tools is very few of us record the relationship layer. And the AI tools do it very naturally. And then even if we recorded the relationship layer, it's a pain in the butt to surface it out of the CRM because if we're a good note-taking firm, there's so many freaking notes. And the AI is also good at surfacing it back. And I mean, like those become the key unlocks that we just couldn't do until LLM-driven AI made all this word things possible.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Well, listen, everybody, if you want to know more about who we are and what we do, please go ahead and hit that QR code on your screen. You can book your demo today. For those of you who are asking the difference between us and some of the other competitors, what we'd really like for you to do is test us side by side. If you're really looking at an AI assistant, go ahead and see how they look. See what you think about the user interface, see what you think about the features, and testing us side by side is something that we're very confident in because, well, to be brutally honest, most people end up choosing us. Sorry, that was shameless, but it's just true, and I had to say it out loud. And of course, and I don't know if you would be hiding under a rock, but if you're not following Mark Gilbert or Michael Kitces on all social media platforms, please make sure that you do, and make sure that you're signing up for Kitces' blog, which is wildly influential and important because he is probably, if not the #1 most influential person in financial services. So for Michael and Mark and all of us here at Zocks, we'll see you on another webinar very soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Matt.